This interview is part of our series on women in science and technology.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kamla. My guest today is Shailaja Venkatsubramanyan. She is an associate professor at San Jose State University. Welcome, Shailaja.
Thank you.
What do you teach?
I teach in the department of what used to be called information systems. I mean, it keeps changing its name all the time, but generally across the country or across the world, the kind of department it is, the kind of courses we offer, this is referred to as management information systems. And it sits in the School of Business within the university.
So it's different from computer science and engineering?
It is. It's very different from computer science and engineering. So in fact, most of the faculty who teach in an MIS department, in fact, have PhDs in MIS and not in computer science. So MIS as a discipline is something that sits between engineering and business. So if someone were to major in MIS, they would take both technical courses, database management system, Python programming, that's the current programming trend, what else? Systems analysis and design. They take a whole bunch of courses, networking, computer security, but they also take courses in business. So they do learn about accounting and marketing and organizational management and so on. And so when they graduate, unlike computer science graduates, they have both the technical background and the business background.
Okay, so they are conversant.
They're conversant in both.
In both sides.
Right.
So they can sit between the tech part of the company and the business part of the company and help each group talk to one another.
That's exactly the point of their training.
So do they make good product managers then?
Oh yes, absolutely. They make great product managers in technology companies. They make very good project managers. And in fact, our students, in fact, depending on where their interests lie, sometimes they end up getting very technical jobs because that is what interests them. Sometimes it's completely management. Sometimes it's something that blends the two. So they find a spot where they feel comfortable, but they are qualified pretty much to be anywhere.
Is it common to have women as teachers in MIS or computer science department?
Not really, and that's very unfortunate and very surprising. So this is something...
Why do you say surprising?
I don't see why women cannot do this, or why women don't major in technical fields. There's no reason for it. Which is why it surprises me, and also because I was so excited about this major when I took courses in MIS. Actually, I did that as a part of my master's degree, which was actually in accounting. And so when I got to take all these computer information systems classes, I was so excited and I was happy to do it. When I was getting my master's in accounting, that's when I got to take information systems or computer classes for the first time. And I remember being so excited to take them, and they were, it came naturally to me, and I didn't even think that I'm a woman taking these courses, that the gender was not relevant at all. So now when I'm in this situation, and sometimes I have classrooms where I see no women.
No women?
Absolutely.
In San Jose, in Silicon Valley?
Yes, I have taught classes where there have been 0 women, sometimes maybe a handful, maybe 5 or less, sometimes 10 or less in a class of, say, 40, 45 students. It does still disappoint me, but I'm hoping that this will change over time.
That is surprising, because if you had told me that this was in some other part of the world, maybe we could have understood, but we are talking about the heart of Silicon Valley.
Yes, that's right.
Where there are students whose parents are working in the tech industry, right? Mm-hmm. You would think that there would be more women.
Absolutely. I mean, being in a university that's in the heart of the Silicon Valley, it's like a dream come true for a lot of people. Unfortunately, though, I think now that I have my own children, I'm getting a little bit of a better understanding that this problem starts pretty early.
In what way?
So, for instance, my daughter, she's 10 now, so a couple of years ago when she was 8, she took an after-school robotics class. And so when I went to pick her up on the first day and I peeked into the class, I noticed that she was the only girl in the class. And again, there was no reason for that. And thankfully, she didn't notice. So I was quite happy to let her keep doing it, and she was happy to do it. And so I think in some ways, there may be a question of parents nudging their daughters away from technology by not giving them the opportunities, like, say, these robotics classes when they're younger. It could be some amount of self-selection as well, because as children start growing up and they're in 5th grade and middle school, and I know my daughter certainly talks about this. She calls herself a nerd and a geek, and not in a positive way. So,
Why do you say not in a positive way?
Well, that's how she feels about it. When she says some people called me a geek, she knows it's not meant as a compliment, or she feels it's not a compliment. So in fact, I just turned it around and I told her, wow, that's such a great compliment. You should be proud of it. And in fact, when we went on a trip to the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, I bought her a little teddy bear which said, I love my little geek. So yeah, so it is to some extent some amount of self-selection among the girls themselves. And I think unless a mentor in the form of a teacher or a parent or someone else doesn't intervene at that age and say, you know what, there's no reason for you to feel like this, that may then result in fewer females graduating in computer science and information systems.
Could it also be that sometimes, there have been studies that have shown that girls kind of lag behind when they enter middle school because they don't understand math, or they lose an interest because the teacher is not able to reach out to them? Because when you're a teacher, you either pitch to the 20% of the class or 80% of the class. So sometimes you get caught in that kind of a dynamic.
When it comes to math, I don't think it's a problem just with women. I think in general, again, that's something that surprised me when I came to this country, was this fear of math, which seems to be pretty common. So
is this unfounded or founded fear?
Well, math is math. Whether you're in India or somewhere else or in the US, math is math. And again, a fear of math is not rational, at least in my opinion. And it's, I know you mentioned to me that you did have a fear of math, but I do believe, as a teacher, as a professor, I do believe that it is possible to help students get over the fear of certain subjects, especially.
How?
Well, in my case, or with my students, be it programming, be it math, be it anything, the first thing I try to tell them is that you can do it. But words don't always cut it. So usually when I discover that with my students or with my children there's a fear of learning a particular subject matter, I take it really slow. I do baby steps. And then I give them tasks to do, which I know they will be able to do, given what they've learned. Because I do know that if people taste success, even in small things, it then entices them to continue doing more of it, because success does taste good to most people. So that's really important. The other thing that I think is really important is that the person who's teaching should be compassionate. That's really important. But besides compassionate, be very encouraging and enthusiastic about the subject. So it does happen that when I teach, I do perk myself up all the time. Sometimes I may not find a concept terribly interesting, but I think it's part of my job to actually make it sound interesting, and don't let them feel that our teacher herself doesn't care about it. So showing them that I love what I do. And a lot of times, I tell them stories from the time I learned a subject like, say, database management system, where I literally fell in love with the subject. It was so good. I enjoyed it. And when I tell them things like this, sometimes some of these students, this is the first time they're hearing someone talking about falling in love with a subject. And they realize, oh my God, that's even possible. So I try to be enthusiastic, and enthusiasm I do find is infectious. So students catch on, they actually want to listen to you. And then of course, I try a lot of other techniques, such as using analogies. I find that using analogies is extremely powerful. So in fact, one of my brothers, who's an extremely good teacher himself, he doesn't teach as a profession, but he used to teach me when I was a kid. I remember when I was in 7th or 8th grade, he used analogies to teach me about planes and points and lines. And to this date, I can remember those concepts so clearly. I even remember the piece of paper he held up to represent a plane. So what I do is, a lot of times for difficult concepts, I try to come up with analogies that students can identify with. And usually that's very helpful.
Were you always good at math?
No, I don't think I was excellent at math. I think I'm decent. I'm okay. But I think...
Did you struggle with it?
I think all of us do struggle when it comes to higher levels of math, when it comes to calculus and so on. But I think I was very fortunate that I had 4 older siblings who were all very good at math, and so I could get help from them. So yes.
Was your dad good at math?
Yes, he's extremely good at math. My dad is very good at mental arithmetic, like many in this generation are, at least in India. And so yes, so I was surrounded by people who were good at math.
But you also had a family history of folks being good at math.
Yes. So in fact, my father's maternal grandfather, his name was Narayan Iyer, and he actually was instrumental in identifying the great mathematician Ramanujam's intelligence and his capacity to do wonderful things with math. And in fact, Ramanujam was employed at Madras Port Trust, where he worked for my great-grandfather. And he was also, my great-grandfather was also instrumental in actually encouraging him to go to Cambridge to get further education or not even further education, to continue his work in math.
How did that story come down in your family?
Oh, actually, it just through word of mouth. So in fact, we had older people in the family, some of whom have passed away, who actually seen Ramanujam's mother come home and talk to my grandmother, because after Ramanujam passed away, his wife and his mother continued to live in Chennai, and they used to come home and talk to my relatives. And because there was a family connection between the two, and since my father actually met Narayan Iyer, although he was very little at that time, all these stories were passed down. And for us, it was very fascinating because, wow, it's our great-grandfather actually knew Ramanujam and actually worked with him. And since he himself was a mathematician, it's even more interesting for us.
So Ramanujam's story was captured in Celluloid, The Man Who Knew Infinity.
Yes.
With Dev Patel.
Yes.
That's Ramanujam. Did they go to your family for that story?
Yes, actually not the people who made the movie, but the person who wrote the book, The Man Who Knew Infinity. He met with a lot of people in our family to gather information for the book. And in fact, one of the characters in the movie is my great-grandfather. So it was very exciting for me and my children in particular to actually go and see this movie.
So math was in the air, in the ether in your house.
And I think that's true for a lot
Cloud computing was happening.
Yes. No, but I do think that's very true for a lot of Indian families. Indian middle-class families, I don't know whether you would agree, but maths is considered almost like the benchmark for intelligence.
In some ways, you know, you have to be good in math and science, you know, if you're in the middle class. And you grew up with that thing.
Exactly.
So what did you think you were going to be doing in undergrad?
Ideally, I would have loved to do engineering and go into science, but for a variety of reasons, I ended up in commerce. So it wasn't my field of choice, but like a good student, like a good daughter, once I was there, I did my best. I studied hard. I tried my best to do well in exams, and even came to the US to get a master's in accounting. But the moment I discovered that there is something called information systems, that's when.
How did you discover information systems?
I think I was very lucky. So in the sense, when I started my master's program, or just before I started...
This was at Virginia Tech.
This was at Virginia Tech. So just before I started my master's program, I remember there was this social gathering in Blacksburg, the town where the university resides. And I ran into this professor. His name is Professor or Dr. Tarun Sen, and he was one of the professors in the accounting department. And what I found out was he actually did not teach accounting. He taught database management systems and C++ and other courses. And that's when I found out that one of the things that was possible was specializing in information systems, which was...
Being in the accounting department.
Being in the accounting department, because now a lot of companies do use information systems, or in fact, this was in the early 90s.
It's no longer ledgers.
It was no longer ledgers. In fact, this was in the early 90s, so the revolution was just starting. And so it was very important for accountants to understand information systems. And so when I discovered that these courses were being offered, I just jumped at the chance and took every single information systems course that was being offered by the department. And again, I was very fortunate that I found a mentor in this professor, because he was the one who suggested that I go on to do a PhD in information systems.
You had no plans of doing a PhD?
Not at all, because I thought I was not qualified. Because in India...
You were not qualified because?
Because my undergraduate degree was in accounting, and even my master's degree technically was in accounting, but majoring in information systems. So the thought of doing a PhD did not cross my mind, but when Dr. Sen, he mentioned this to me, I was so thrilled to even hear that someone has faith in me and someone is suggesting that I do it. And I did apply to PhD programs, and I ended up at University of Arizona for a doctoral program.
Was that your dream come true for you?
Absolutely, because in fact, I think the day I got the letter saying that I'd been accepted into the PhD program, I would say is one of the happiest days of my life.
So, and PhD was not a struggle for you?
Oh no, it was a struggle. I wish I could say it was not a struggle, but so I land up in the PhD program, and the first thing I notice is that people have come with very strong backgrounds. Many of the Indian students in particular had backgrounds in engineering, had strong backgrounds in math, and so yes, I did have to struggle to catch up, but it was okay. I was in a field I loved. I knew it was an opportunity, a God-given opportunity, and I was very thankful for it. And so I did work very hard, and yes, it was a struggle, but it was worth it.
So when did you start coding? Was it in your master's classes or your PhD?
In my master's. So in fact, I took my first coding class as such in the summer. I wasn't even registered for the class. So I talked to Dr. Sen and I said, I cannot afford to take the class. He said, yeah, you can just sit in on it. And I attended every class, took all the exams, did all the assignments, just because I loved it, not because I was getting a grade for it, because I wasn't. After I took C++, I did go to the computer science department, and I ended up taking a course in COBOL, of all things. But that's because I wanted to become a better programmer, and programming was very thrilling for me. So yeah, so those were
Why was it thrilling?
It's just learning a new language and getting a machine to do what you want it to do. I thought was very, very fascinating for me.
Is it because it's so logical and so rational and it's so clean? Because when you program, your thoughts have to be very clear.
Sure. In fact, I did enjoy data structures and algorithms and those kinds of classes that require you to come up with steps. However, I think it's just the thrill of being able to make something happen. Create something. I think that was what was missing in accounting. You're really not creating anything. You're just recording what happened and you're reporting what happened. However, with at least with computers, for me, it felt a lot more creative.
That is what excited you.
Absolutely.
You're no longer balancing the books.
Exactly. Balancing the books had absolutely no interest for me after that.
Then when you graduated from your PhD program, what did you do?
So the Arizona PhD program, it's kind of almost taken for granted that you will go into teaching.
Why?
They prepare you for that. So the way they prepare you for jobs is by preparing you or training you to be a faculty member somewhere and to publish papers and so on. So I had done some teaching as a part of my grad program. So I did apply to universities, and my first job was with Tulane University in New Orleans. So I did go there. And
How was New Orleans?
Oh, it was a mixed bag. I think New Orleans is great as a tourist, but to live there, at least I was living alone, I don't think I really enjoyed it that much. Some parts of New Orleans, at least then, were not very safe, so it made me nervous. But I did enjoy what New Orleans had to offer in terms of music, because I'm a vegetarian, so the food was pretty much lost on me. But the music was great.
The etouffee and the jambalaya and all of that was lost on you.
Completely lost on me.
But you did attend some jazz.
I used to go every Friday. Every Friday evening, I used to go listen to music in one of the bars, and I think that was great.
Okay. And then what brought you to Silicon Valley?
So it was when I was at Tulane University that my husband and we met actually when we were in Arizona. So my husband took our job with IBM's research center, Almaden Research Center in San Jose. So we had this two-body problem going on. And but then when I visited my husband and I saw the Bay Area, I said, this is where I want to live. And so once the decision was made to move to the Bay Area, I just happened to find out about this startup company that was doing knowledge management work, and their approach was kind of similar to something I'd done in my PhD program. So I applied to them, and I got into the startup, and I was with them for 3 years.
And then why did you go to teaching?
So the 3 years was with a startup, and very exciting. It was a wonderful experience, but you have to work a lot when you're in a startup.
So you were married to a guy who did a startup, and
Yes.
you worked in a startup.
Yes.
What can you tell us about startup life and its impact on family?
Oh my God. So startup life. So when I was part of a startup, I did not found it. I was an employee. At least then I didn't have children. So the only person that was getting neglected was my husband. So, but it is true that I had absolutely no time to socialize, to entertain, to go on vacations, nothing. Of course, if you love your job, which I did, it was fine. I did not miss any of those other things. But yes, your family does pay a price. And my husband did his startup more recently, and we have children who are now 10 and 13. And yes, they got to see very little of their dad for the past 4 years.
So it does take a toll.
Of course it does. It absolutely does.
On the family.
Absolutely. And also I think the person who's doing the startup, who's working in the startup, they miss out on some of the years of their children as well.
Would you call it the dark side of a startup?
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's the unspoken element.
Yes. So it's actually the person who's working in the startup or founding the startup, they're working very hard, but the family sacrifices too.
And that is never, never is too strong a word, but that's hardly ever highlighted.
Yes.
You celebrate the success of a startup, but you don't see at the other end what are some of the sacrifices.
Exactly. So in fact, when I was working with the startup, I remember, so we were working weekends and late nights, and for me it was all right. I mean, I didn't have a life. This was my life. But I do remember there was this one woman who did not want to come in a particular weekend because she was divorced and the kids were going to be with her that weekend, which is actually a very good reason. But that was frowned upon. Everybody had to be a team player and show up. And she did get laid off at some point in time. Of course, I'm sure they did not link it back to that particular incident. But unless you're able to give it your 100% or more, startups will not work for you.
If you had not worked in the startup for 3 years, do you think you would have understood what your husband was doing when he had a startup?
Probably not. Probably not. So I think because having seen how startups work, and also having seen how the founders of the startup are under so much stress because there's so much money on the line, your employees depend on you, you have so much going on, I think, yes, it did make me understand the situation much better.
Would you ever do a startup again?
Would I ever do a startup? It would depend. It would depend on which stage of life I'm at. So right now I take care of my dad. I have 2 kids who depend on me. My husband's busy. So this is certainly not a good time. But if there's ever a time when I have less responsibilities, I wouldn't mind doing a startup. Because I think it has its, I mean, you learn a lot through it as well.
If you were to go back in time and look at the year that you graduated from high school, what subject would you take now, looking back?
Looking back? Oh, most certainly I would go into science, and I would try to get into a computer science program.
What do you think you didn't do when you were in high school that had you taken this detour to discover your love for computers and computer science?
The fact that I went into commerce. And I remember the only exposure we had to computers in that program was in the last year of the BCom, or the Bachelor's of Commerce degree, was we did have a class in programming, but it turns out it was all on pen and paper. So in fact, we had the teacher come in, write things on the board, and we would write it down, and we would be writing programs. And we
by hand?
By hand. And there was a computer lab in which there were a couple of computers, but none of us were allowed access to it. So
you never wrote the code, you never compiled it, you never saw Hello World?
We did write code, except it was by hand.
That's what I said. You didn't see Hello World on the computer.
No, we didn't see Hello World on the computer. But our textbook did tell us, yes, if your program worked, yes, you would see Hello World. But I think that's also a question of resources, at least at that point in time in India. Because when I came to the US and in Virginia Tech as well as in Arizona, when I saw these huge computer labs, it just blew my mind.
What would you tell to somebody who is probably in the same state as you, where they don't know whether they should take commerce or a non-science degree or science degree? What if they came to you and say, Professor, this is what I want to do, what advice would you give them?
So this is a 15-year-old in India?
Well, here.
Oh, here, okay.
Because even here, sometimes, you don't have faith. Like you said, you're in your daughter's class, there are barely any girls, and she's the only one who's in the robotics class. And you said your daughter calls herself a geek and a nerd because that's what her friends call her. So that's why I'm asking. So imagine if it is your daughter who came and says, Mom, I don't want to do because I don't want to be branded as a geek.
Oh, if she tells me that, I'm going to sit her down for a lecture for sure. In fact, with my daughter...
Behind the lectern.
Yes. In fact, I've already bought her books about women and in science and so on. So I'm telling her, I'm already educating her that there have been a lot of females who have already done a lot of things in technology and science. But if someone I don't know very well were to come to me and say, what should I do? I would first try to figure out if they're truly interested in technology. And if I find that even there's a spark, but it's been hidden or it's been pushed back because of lack of encouragement, I would try to bring that out and then have that person make a decision. Because making a decision based on the fact that you were not encouraged to do something, I think that's not a good idea.
Well, thank you so much. I wish you were my math teacher.
I still can be.
You never know, I may take you up. Okay. Thank you, Shailaja, for stopping by and talking to us.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for watching. If you missed any of our shows, you can catch them on our YouTube channel. Remember to join us next week when we bring you another new conversation. Until then, goodbye.